Okay, I think it's time to start with the next session this morning. Welcome from my side. My name is Michael Hemmer. I'm a director at BDO. Actually, I'm very pleased that BDO is sponsoring this event for BDO. Of course, digital reporting is one of the topics that we focus at actually. And just to introduce myself a little bit, I come more from the practitioner side. I've been working in big banks here in Austria and had leading functions in accounting roles actually, and that's where I come from. And since 2 years, I've now working as a director for BDO and consulting in financial services actually. And one of the main topics that we of BDO, of course, focus at the moment is, of course, the European Single Electronic Format reporting. So it's a pleasure for me to be presenting today on the topic. And my focus today will be implementation, legal, and audit. I think you heard yesterday about technical specifications with regard to ESEF and XBRL and inline XBRL and how this works actually. And this is spread around the globe. So as XBRL is spread around the globe, so BDO is spread around the globe, so to say. We from BDO, we have a strong presence in Austria. You see here just a slide on us actually. We've got 9 locations in Austria, but we've got 167 locations around the globe. Here you see some more of the numbers, how many partners we have and how long BDO is established. And what I want to mention actually in this context is that I'm, of course, also in close contact with my BDO colleagues in Germany, France, Italy, Spain, on the topic of ESEF, because ESEF is a requirement European-wide for companies that are listed at an exchange. Actually, they have to fulfill the ESEF requirements, and therefore we from BDO, we also teamed up European-wide and internationally with our partners to discuss software vendor products, to discuss what is our attitude towards auditing, ESEF report and things like that. And I think this makes a lot of sense to have this common view actually and how others are doing it from a European perspective. And this is also what I want to cover in this presentation, what it looks like from a European perspective, who are the players, what is the legal situation, how do we deal accounting wise, and also regarding the vendor side, when it comes from the practitioner's point of view, how to best implement ESEF reporting. So again, you see here BDO Austria International, and I'd like to move forward then to start with the contents actually. Why ESEF? Why this European Single Electronic Format reporting? Of course, yesterday it was mentioned already that everything, a lot of parts in life are moving towards digitalization, and so does annual reporting. And I like to mention that in Europe, I think we are anyways one of the last areas worldwide where we do not have any digital reporting. If you take a look at the US, they have these automated filings using XBRL already since 10 years. And in other countries, you have this individually, you have taxonomies, you have data reporting actually already. So what are the benefits of this electronic readable reporting? I mean, we heard it yesterday, but just to present it a little bit from my side. First of all, it's human and machine readable because it's HTML and inline XBRL format simultaneously. Of course, which does for the first time really allow to work with the data. And I think this will change the future of reporting. I think this is really something what could have a material impact on how companies communicate directly with the investors. I mean, we see this kind of communication with financial markets and electronic reporting in some industries. For instance, my industry, where I've been working for more than 20 years, banking, they are very much used to that kind of thing because they had all sorts of reports and all kinds of data to report, not just reports, but you know, in Austria, we had already an initiative a couple of years ago where we started to report data instead of final reports. So this is something something that might be also on the agenda later down, actually, a little bit. But at the moment, we stick with XHTML and inland XBRL reporting under the ESEF scheme, actually. So what it should allow, actually, is a better comparability and transparency of reports. And what I understood from some clients, actually, and also from the presentations yesterday, that ESEF needs to be seen within this better communication initiative of the ISB, actually. So the ISB receive complaints by readers of financial statements. They claim that this is not transparent enough, that reports are not comparable in a way that it's easily to say, okay, how this is done. Of course, I know many situations where banks report things differently, industries report things very differently, and you have to bear in mind that the ISB has, of course, has been taking action on this, actually, and wants to change and more streamline also the structure of our reporting itself. And this ESEF reporting is part of this, actually, because this is how this data should be transmitted, actually, to the readers of financial statements. What we see in some countries, actually, like Spain and the Netherlands, that banks have already been trying to promote electronic reporting, because for them there's a big benefit in having automated data, because they save all the time to retype again all the numbers in the electronic systems. Because if you use PDFs at the moment for annual reports, data-wise, this is not really helpful, and somebody needs to sit down and retype the numbers and then structure it in order to provide the data in a structured format to work with it. So this is going to change in the future. At least this is the plan, actually, of the reporting, though not all market participants that are affected see it like that. But this is what I like to stress, actually, that this is not just an additional burden for companies, that they have to do it as an add-on, but the aim of the whole exercise, as meant by the European Union and as meant by the ISB, is really to change the way reporting works, actually. And data is available directly and immediately by the users. But what it does not do, actually, it does not change the content and the presentation of IFRS reporting. So the IFRS taxonomy, which is the basis of the ESEF taxonomy, is an open taxonomy. It's not a structure where you have to say, okay, you have to report your P&L and your balance sheet and statement of changes in equity according to a new form or different information. This is not the aim of it. Just to be 100% clear on this, companies still need to report to the users of financial statements what they consider reportable and important for users of financial statements. So briefly, again, what is a taxonomy? The IFRS taxonomy is basically a system to categorize and structure information. The IFRS taxonomy by ESMA is the reporting standard explicitly ruled out to continue with a PDF format. They started early enough in 2015 on doing this. And what I was wondering all the time is that they did not receive a lot of feedback, actually, on their draft versions, actually. And later on, people have been complaining that why not using PDF? But I think it's far too late now, because, you know, ESMA really tried hard to get some feedback, but didn't receive any. I think they received 4 comment letters on their first initial drafts, which is ridiculous if you consider that European-wide more than 5,000 companies might be affected by this. But anyways, the way it went actually was that there was the EU regulation in December 2018, finalized actually and published in 2019, so it's all legally enforceable and already existing, and I think this was for most companies and also software vendors the starting point to really implement this ESEF taxonomy. When I, for the first time, to be honest, read this EU regulation, I couldn't believe it, because it was a regulation with more than 600 pages. So if you take a look at that, you find all the taxonomy fields in the regulation, and that's more than 5,000 fields actually, and over 600 pages. So when I talk to clients, a lot of clients, they shy away from saying, okay, from the more than 600 pages, and say, oh, what is that? This seems to be really hard to implement. But anyways, that's what you have to go through when you do the implementation. You need to get familiar with the taxonomy and how it does work and how it is structured. So what does it look like? You see it here. I think it was presented yesterday. This is another example. This is an example taken from the IFRS taxonomy. And in the illustrative examples, you see cash equivalents. You see how this is tagged actually, and how the inline XBRL embedding works. I think you have seen this yesterday, so we do not need to really discuss this in detail. This is the ESMA information, which also highlights how these inline XBRL reports look like. So you have the XHTML document. By the way, XHTML is just a number of data that starts and ends. And if you take into consideration that most annual reports consist out of 200, 300 pages, so XHTML is just your raw data. So you need to have some structuring, you need to have some layout designed. So this is important for software vendors to focus on the layout, because I think with the use of XHTML and inline XBRL and more electronic use of data, companies must not forget that this is kind of also a kind of a marketing instrument for them. And just to have the data 200 pages presented in one single row without page numbers or whatever, I think is not really, from my point of view, advisable to do actually, because users will get lost in this kind of continuing data without having any structure. Okay, so this is also another example of what it looks like. Here you see the yellow cells, and here you see how the inline XBRL data is displayed actually, if you have an inline XBRL reader available. So this is an extract from the EU regulation. I mentioned this earlier. This is the EU regulation. They were even not so sure how this works out in Europe. So that's why they had this field study conducted by ESMA in 2017. I think this was mentioned already yesterday. And they did it in 2 steps because they were a little bit afraid how companies end up with implementing it. So from 2020 on, you have to do just tag the primaries, which is a balance sheet, P&L, equities statement, and cash flow statement, and all the rest you can tag in one go. So this was also one part of the criticism of it, because if you take a look at annual report, you see most of the information is of course covered in the notes to the reports. And if you just have one tag for all the notes for 200 pages, I mean, it doesn't help you anything. But still, as a starting point, that's the way it has been described. And what I've got here is a display on 2022, because from 2022 on, there is more detailed information for the notes required, and also more detailed information initially about the company, about the currency translation procedures, franchise fees, functional currency information, and description of accounting policies, as you see here actually. And when I do consult clients, and this is what I understand also from a lot of clients, that they consider to do it all in one go actually, and do this upfront, this block tagging of the notes that is just due for 2022 on. But I think the additional effort is not so huge. And once you start to work on that, I mean, I think it does make sense to take a look at what you have to do for the block tagging and already start with the block tagging. When it comes to tagging, as mentioned, it's more than 5,000 fields. So these 5,000 fields, of course, they apply for all kinds of industries. This is not industry specific. But still, this is also what we learned from the field study, that companies need even more than these 5,000 fields actually, and because they report things that are not covered by these 5,000 fields, so they need some extensions in the reports, which is necessary. So some companies even want to do a detailed tagging right now because they say, okay, being focused on my investor information needs, I like to tell them what is, for instance, my maturities for loan obligations, what is my expected credit loss obligations, what is my detailed leasing business, what does it look like? So you could do this already from the beginning. It's not mandatory, but even from 2020 on, you can start to do a detailed tagging for some parts of your notes which you want to immediately communicate and in a detailed way communicate to your users of financial statements. Many companies say, no, I'm happy to fulfill this one way or the other, and I don't play around with any detail tagging, but there's also some other companies who have a more investor-oriented view of the whole exercise, and they want to do it already right from the beginning. Okay. As mentioned, this is an RSP initiative on the better communication. And why do I mention that? I mention it because when you do the whole exercise and you now have to do this ESEF reporting and there's not much time left until the end 2020, you should also bear in mind this is a perfect or very good moment to reconsider what are you telling your users of financial statements, your investors. Is this the right information? Because, of course, the board is working on this communication in financial reporting because the usual complaints that they get are three problem areas. First of all, investors complain what companies report is not enough of the relevant information. So if you take a look at the moment, for instance, banks reporting under COVID-19, they report a lot of things, but some of it is really unclear. How they treat moratoria, how they treat expected credit losses, how do they derive conclusions about the future economic situation. Some banks do not report that actually, and also some other businesses do not report, for instance, what COVID-19 impacts will be for them. So this is a typical complaint that there's not enough relevant information. On the other hand, there is too much irrelevant information, so these boilerplate repetitions of IFRS text that you could read in IFRS standards anyway. So this is useless, but still you find this in many company reports. And last but not least, there's ineffective communication. There's information that is unclear why companies think they need to report that, because investors do not understand what is the meaning of it for the company. So when doing your ESEF reporting, this is a good moment to review what are you currently reporting. Do you want to stick with that or do you want to change it? Because of course this applies also to the primaries, because some companies they report non-recurring profits, for instance, which is a classical thing now in ESEF, which is not covered and which requires, when you prepare it, it requires the issuer to use extensions. So better you streamline it and you avoid extensions, because this saves work for the company that is issuing or preparing the financial statements. One more thing, if you think this is a one-time exercise, doing this taxonomy thing, then this is not the case, I have to tell you. Because the taxonomy, this was, from my point of view, really incredible that the IFRS did work a lot on preparing these 5,000 fields, going through all their standards, and really defining individually what are the reporting requirements, either by standards or by common practice of companies reporting under IFRS. And annually to review it, and there's an annual process to review and change the taxonomy. For instance, in 2019, they issued a lot of common practice updates on IFRS 13, fair value measurement. And if you take a look at this, for instance, this covers topics like sensitivity analysis and things like that. So this allows you really to have detailed tagging for detailed information. And at the moment, the IFRS has been publishing already the 2020 taxonomy updates. So this is an annual process, and ESEF has to take it over because the IFRS taxonomy is the basis for the ESEF taxonomy. And currently they work on the interbank reform scheme, and they issued just 2 weeks ago the IBOR reform phase 2 paper. And what they did more or less at the same time, they already issued also changes in the taxonomy so that companies can use taxonomy elements to tag their disclosures regarding IBOR reform, this interbank offered rates, which is currently a big topic in financial markets. Okay, this you see, this is the general improvements section of the 2019 taxonomy release by the IASB. So when it comes to impacts and challenges, as I mentioned already, when you implement it, one of the things that you have to be aware is the taxonomy itself. It's an open taxonomy, so it's not that you have a clear description and you search for the number that fulfills what are you required to report. This is not the way it works. The way it works, you have to derive your own concept for your company. And this requires you to understand the taxonomy, to understand the definitions of the taxonomy, because the taxonomy is a structure. So there is subtotals, there is items that belong together. So you have to understand, first of all, the definitions. What is an axis? What is a member? What is a role? What is monetary item? So monetary item, for those that are familiar with IFRS, they know this is an IFRS terminology to distinguish monetary and non-monetary items, of course. So, of course, when doing this, you have to have some IFRS knowledge. Then you have to understand the relations. This is very important. How are fields related to each other? What is the hierarchical structure between the fields? Otherwise, your individual numbers will not add up in your operating result or whatever, or your end of year balance, whatever the numbers may be. And of course, this is done by a lot of validation rules. The validation rules are arithmetic relations between the fields, and the concept behind it is debits and credits. There are always attached debits and credits to the individual items that you have in the taxonomy. And the extensions, as I mentioned, if you don't find the appropriate item in these 5,000 fields, you have to use an extension, but you have to anchor the extension in the taxonomy. Otherwise, the whole ESEF reporting would lose comparability between companies. We see it in the US, where they use extensions, and the extensions, they are not anchored. So every company says, okay, for me, I use this kind of extension, and that's it. And nobody can compare it anyways, because the extension, they are not related to anything. This is not the way under the ESEF taxonomy. You clearly have to distinguish this extension fits the most to a particular item of the ESEF taxonomy, and this you have to validate, this you have to connect, and you have to establish and report the validation for that. So this is really important. So you see here, for instance, what it looks like. You see IFRS full, for instance, denotes that this is the taxonomy for the IFRS full version. It's not the SME version. It's not the interim reporting, whatever. It's the full version of it. And there you see X is, for instance, monetary item. It could be either duration or it could be a point in time. You see it's a debit item or a credit item. And you see what it is. And last but not least, if you take a look at the right-hand column, you see it's a common practice item. And you see even where it relates to. So this is really helpful when going through your disclosures to take a look at the taxonomy and say, okay, under IAS 7, what should I report actually under common practice? Or IFRS 9, which is usually which covers a lot of disclosures. You see all the items according to the taxonomy that might be applicable. So you can make sure that you do not oversee any information that you should have reported in the past already. So there has been a lot of work been done by the IFRS taxonomy group actually, and this is a good opportunity for you to review your disclosures and your reporting. As mentioned, the aim is comparability and transparency to increase that. What we will see actually, and you should be aware of that, because some people say, okay, this is an unnecessary burden, now I need to do this because there's another EU regulation that I don't like, but still this creates a lot of work. If you think like that, I think you might be really wrong, because of course what it should lead to is some further benchmarking, and of course investors will ask you much more actually where your deviations from the industry standard to come from. If all industry companies reported completely different and show different numbers, it's much easier for for readers of financial statements to come up and ask you and your investor relations department, why is it the case that you report it differently actually? So be prepared for that there will be more questions actually, because readers of statements can easily work with your data in the future. With the PDFs, this was not doable. And of course, they can easily create their own reports out of the company's reporting data, and the transparency as well will be much greater than what we have in the PDFs. What I've seen just recently is a survey by one company who actually searched existing financial statements, and they applied the validation rules of the ESEF taxonomy, and they really highlighted all the mistakes that they found in previous years IFRS financial statement of companies, where totals didn't match the individual items, where disclosures didn't fit the primaries and things like that, where they confused plus and minus signs, they had deductions done wrongly in the financial statements. So with the validation rules, this will easily be observable, and this will get transparent, so companies should be aware of that. And last but not least, you can expect that the regulators and supervisors will be key users of your ESEF reports, and they will read out the data and do industry comparisons and things like that. But as mentioned, block tagging is still an obstacle to the transparency and comparability. My point of view is that ESMA will have a wait-and-see approach actually, and if it does all work fine, there will be a move towards more detailed tagging of notes actually under the ESEF reporting. But let's wait and see first of all how 2020 first time tagging turns out to be. So it's not just a number crunching, and also the marketing of glossy annual reports is in focus, as I mentioned at the beginning actually, because at the beginning all the software tool providers, they were very much concerned with doing it the right way, and if you ever take the chance to read the technical standards as issued by ESMA, you find that more than half of it, I would even say 2/3 of it, are covering technical specifications. So this was the focus of all the tool providers at the beginning actually, but now the focus has turned to marketing of these ESEF reports and adjusting this XHTML into nice glossy reports that users will be happy to read under the ESEF taxonomy still. What we do a lot, and what BDO is engaging a lot, is of course helping companies with doing their projects on ESEF transition. So we have a lot of criteria, and we work a lot with tool providers, of course, because they have all the technical abilities, and we from BDO, we face, of course, more on the IFRS side, which is very important. So this is a perfect synergy between us and tool providers, and there's also selected tool providers where we are in a close relation, actually, and we have to recommend tools to our clients. And this here you find on this slide some criteria for tool selection. For instance, if you take a look at the taxonomy, there's more than 5,000 fields. It's important that the tool provides some easy and structured browsing of the taxonomies. Otherwise, you get really lost, and you might overlook taxonomy items that apply to your reporting. And you create extensions wrongly then, which is of course an error, and you shouldn't do that, because if you find a taxonomy element, you have to use it, even if it's coming out of the note section, but applies to P&L positions, you have to use that, but this requires you to have a perfect structured browsing capability in your tool. Secondly, there should be a multi-language capability, because of course you have to reuse it probably in your subsidiaries within your group of companies, and they want to use it, and therefore you need to be able to set the language to a different one than used by the head of the group, actually. Software support, of course, it's always important here. It's also very important to have enough software support. I myself have seen software problems already where you did not expect them. For instance, uploading the taxonomy. For those that are practitioners in the call, I can tell you this seems to be an easy go, but in fact it's not. I've seen clients that have really had to struggle to get this taxonomy up and running in the tool. So you should be aware that there's then enough software support by the provider to help you on that, actually, and to have a smooth running and smooth support by the tool provider. Layout functionality, images, printability. This is the next point, actually, because just the pure XHTML is not really printable. So there should be some enhancements to have this printable and have nice and glossy reports. Extensions and anchoring. This was one of the areas where a lot of tool providers had problems. Even into 2020, they have been improving on that, on the validation rules, to make the extensions and the anchoring work and to make them traceable. And to have transparent validation rules within the tool, of course, is of utmost importance, because otherwise users find out that you did your job not perfectly and you have some validation errors, and this should not be the case. But just to tell you from practice how it works, that in the US, for instance, once there is a report published to the SEC, within hours, you have already specialized companies that read them out and tell you where there's errors in the annual reports, because whether they have special programs to weed out all wrong validations of numbers. And of course, this is a damage to the reputation, first of the customer, and secondly of the tool providers. So you should be really careful when doing the tagging and doing your ESEF reports. Roll forward of previous period taggings. You should not start from scratch again. This is a functionality that I've seen within most tools, and you should make sure that this does work, actually. And another point that I'd like to mention, of course, this is just a selection of items. There's many more when it comes to tool selection criteria, but just to mention ones that I've seen in practice, actually, and that I consider worth to mention. Is the one I need to mention is the input data restrictions. You have to make sure, is it Excel, is it Word, is it PDFs that you can use for uploading in the tool, actually? Do you have a reporting tool? Probably you heard it from Amana. They have built-in or bolt-on solutions. I know UB Partners, they have a smaller solution, for instance. So you have to decide if you want to have a bigger reporting solution where you have all the data streamlined into the tool, or you just bolt it on your existing consolidation and reporting framework and upload all the data in the tool to do the ESEF reporting then. Okay, so this was more the implementation side. Now let's come a little bit to the legal framework. And there it's not such a clear picture, I have to say. There's many players actually on the field who are working on that. First of all, the basis is the EU transparency regulation. This is an older regulation dating back into 2013, and this requires actually the transparency rules. This covers the reporting, and EU delegated to ESMA this ESEF, this common European reporting, back then in 2013, and said, okay, ESMA, they had the task to do a cost-benefit analysis. They were mandated to do a selection of the reporting technology, to do some field testing, and to do a drafting of legal technical standards. So what you could say is, from a European point of view, ESMA is clearly in the driving seat because they've got the mandate. And from my personal experience, I did some presentations together with ESMA, with Anna Skatina. Some of you might already have seen her presentations. She's doing a great job, and ESMA is really trying its best to communicate to all the issuers and to the markets what are the requirements. They have a lot of material on their homepage actually to foster and help companies with switching over to ESEF reporting. And taxonomy changes, as I mentioned, there's an annual process of changing taxonomies. This is also prepared by ESMA and has to undergo all the EU legislation procedure, the approval by EU Parliament. From my point of view, this is more a formal thing because whatever ESMA sends to the EU, to the Commission, I think this is approved more or less. From my point of view. ISB, I mentioned they have this taxonomy implementation technical group, so they worked on it, and you could also follow what they are doing. But of course, they're also one important player because their taxonomy at the end is what drives the ESEF taxonomy. So this is what covers the European or international process. And what you have then additionally locally for here in Austria is, for instance, Financial Market Authority. They supervise the adherence to the publication rules because it's a capital markets exercise. And when it comes to capital market exercises, of course, it's the Financial Market Authority that deals a lot with it. On the other hand, you have this publication procedure of ESEF reporting, and this is more a thing that is done in Austria by ÖKB and in Germany by the Bundesanzeiger. What is not existing at the moment, a single European platform where you find all the ESEF reports, unfortunately. So this is still done by each country separately, which I think also needs to be changed by EU as quickly as possible, and there needs to be a connection with all the platforms because nobody wants to search for, let's say, German, French or Polish ESEF reports on a platform that you have to first identify and then try to search for the report on national platforms. I think this is not really helpful. Auditing of ESEF reports, this is something I deal with a little bit later on. The reporting agencies, they also enforce on ESEF, at least this is clarified in Germany. This is not so clear, I would say, in Austria. And for other countries, I think I haven't heard how they deal with it. What I need to mention also is that there is this XBRL platforms. They have platforms where they meet European-wide. I attended them. I think this is really helpful. You find all of the tool providers presenting their tools. You find discussion on the national situations, what kind of progress they have made regarding ESEF reports, and usually also ESMA participates in that. So look out for the homepage actually of International XBRL because they organize these European platforms. So ÖKB is dealing with it, and for those who have to implement it, you should watch out what they do because they now set up a test environment where you can upload annual reports in ESEF format for testing purposes. I think Bundesanzeiger might do something similar in Germany. You have separate ESEF reporting categories for annual reports, half-year statements, and interim reports. But please take note that the mandatory one is just the annual reports, which I think is not really helpful, because all users now get used to get the annual reports in ESEF format, and when it comes to half-year statements in 2021, then they don't find anything on the platform. I think this is not really helpful, and we'll see how quickly this will change actually, and how big the demand will be from investor side to even require half-year statements or quarterly statements on the platform. But the platform, like GmbH in Austria, needs to provide for that. And this seems to be still a bit unclear if they do that, because of course they need to reserve some file space, they have to have a structured process for uploading the report, and there's still some unclear issues. But what they published in June is actually that they allow the data format uploads only XHTML and zip files, and a maximum data size of 100 megabytes actually. But what is still unclear is it's just the data size for just a German version, because you need to upload the German version at a minimum, but those that currently publish in German and English, because to be investor oriented, you should do that, because all the texts in their disclosures, you couldn't understand if it's in German language. All the investors, they could not read the German text in disclosures. So probably it might be a good idea to have also the English versions uploaded, but still this seems to be unclear. And given that we are now mid of September, I think OEMs in Austria and elsewhere in Europe should be clear about their guidelines actually, and the process and procedure regarding the uploads. Financial Market Authority, they amended the Austrian regulation actually, and made clear that companies have to fulfill their obligation under ESEF reporting. They immediately think that the technical standards are an EU regulation, which is immediately by itself effective under Austrian law actually, but still there is no additional implementation regulations available here in Austria, which I think should be done. This is the case in Germany, this is the case in Italy and France and in other European countries. Unfortunately, I think this has not been done so far here in Austria, and this leaves a lot of unclear situations here in Austria from my point of view, because it doesn't give FMA a clear mandate what they can do, how can they check if they can do a validation of reports. Currently, financial market authorities, I understand, they think they can just validate the usability of the published ESEF data, but if there is ESEF data been uploaded which is not correct, it's still unclear who can force a company to republish again. Could it do the Financial Markets Authority? How many hours need to be that the Financial Market Authority can say, okay, this is not usable again, and I force you to republish again. So this should be clarified by a separate implementation legal guidance. One thing to mention is that individual accounts must be uploaded in XHTML as well. Actually, don't forget that you have to do this. I mean, there is no taxonomy for this, but at least you need to report it in XML together with the package. And when it comes to company register filing, there was the intention to have a single reporting that you can send ESEF already for the company register, but unfortunately also this has not been enacted yet, and our companies need to continue with the PDF format for this, which is not really in line with the single reporting initiative. But let's wait and see. Hopefully there's some last minute legal initiative to cover that and to make life a bit easier for companies, that they can do the single reporting under ESEF for the company register. So audit is a big topic. I like this audit topic because for BDO, for us, it's important to be clear on this. And the unfortunate thing is that in Austria, we don't have, as I mentioned just before, any additional implementation legal guidance. So therefore, it's unclear how it needs to be audited. in Austria, there is no public statement yet. It has been discussed within the chamber of auditors actually, but there is no public statement available. So let's then look at what is the European view. Actually, there has been a Q&A on ESEF actually, and from this it's quite clear that the European Union thinks it needs to be audited. And my personal point of view is that it needs to be audited because this ESEF reporting is the official published version of the annual reports actually. So if they are not audited, I mean, and users of financial statements, they are working with data that is not audited, I mean, I think then the whole exercise is really questionable how much sense this does make actually. So EU is quite clear. They are of the view that the provisions include ESEF as a statutory requirement and therefore it has to be audited. Germany, they enacted the implementation guidance and implementation law on ESEF just in middle of August. They had big discussions if ESEF is part of the preparation of statements. This was the initial draft of it, but then there was a lot of comments denying that this should be the final legal outcome. And so they resorted to what they call in German an Offenlegungslösung. So the auditor has to state that the ESEF reporting is compliant with the audited PDF version, if there's still an audited PDF version. So this is the minimum what they have to do, and they have to give it in their audit opinion. So the auditor needs to say something about ESEF if this is compliant, yes or no. I think currently, as I understand it, they have a working group, and this is currently exploring and providing some guidance for auditors and what kind of audit work needs to be done in order to come to a statement regarding the compliance of ESEF with the audited version. Accountancy Europe, they are another player in this, of course. They issued in December 2019 a briefing paper, Independent Assurance on ESEF, and they had the recommendation that was reflected in the German initial draft. They say, okay, either it's part of preparation of the statements, or at least the auditor needs to give his opinion if this is ESEF reporting, and this means ESEF reporting also the tagged version, the inland XBRL, is compliant with ESEF regulation actually. And they say there should not be two separate auditors' reports on the consolidated financial statements, because they could be at different times, and of course investors will be confused if this is the case, and this should be avoided. So it's quite clear that Accountancy Europe also favors this. And last but not least, there has been the Committee of European Auditing Oversight Bodies, and they issued the same guidance actually, that the work to be performed by the auditors needs to be done to assess the compliance of financial statements with ESEF. So they should ensure first that the human readable layer of the financial statements includes the electronic report prepared by the entity is either audited or it's identical to audited information. So if it's audited, it's already part of the preparation of the financial statement, or at least like the German version, the Offenlegungsversion, it should be identical to audited information. And of course, last but not least, even if you give some opinion on the XHML, the need to give some opinion on the marking up, which I think is the more complicated, the more important thing. What I see at the moment, we're talking to tool providers, is that they focus very much on the validation rules, and now some tool providers are working on special audit functionality of ESEF tools in order to help auditors with saying, okay, has the tagging been done correctly actually? And I'm looking forward what they are going to present to us as auditors actually. They are working on this, and this should be available by some tool providers. They I said availability should be somewhere in November. So I'm looking forward to do this. But anyways, as an auditor, from my point of view, I will look at the validation rules. Actually, extensions are very critical. So when you select an audit tool, it should be really very transparent, should have a dashboard function to see where you are, have these 4 eyes principles applied and things like this. So this is things that we as auditors would look like, of course. So last but not least, a few words on the lessons learned when you're in the implementation. There's this field test by ESMA. It was mentioned yesterday. There were also 2 participants from Austria, 2 big companies. This was a big bank. This was Erste Bank and Unica, and big insurance company. And of course, there were a lot of extensions to be used. I think what the outcome was of this was more or less the obvious things. I mean, P&L is rather easy to take. The complex one is the changes in equity, because this has more than one dimension. So this is the thing that you should really try to focus at. This is the most complex thing, and probably when you were in the Amana presentation, I'm sure they have been also trying to explain how the changes in equity works, how the tagging works for the changes in equity. Notes require, of course, the highest number of tags if you do that, actually, because this is the biggest part of the statements. If you take a look at statements, complexity depends significantly on the correctness of presentation. Okay, yeah, that's also very obvious. And it's not an ESEF taxonomy for banks. There have been 5 banks within the sample. They have been complaining, but this doesn't help because they're not going to change the taxonomy for that. Probably there will be big changes to taxonomy with the current IFRS work on primary financial statements, where they have more guidance, more structure, and the taxonomy will then follow. But I do not expect this to come in the near future. This will take a minimum 2 years, 3 years probably, until we have such a change in presentation format in place. Mapping can be very tricky. Yes, I can fully support that statement. It is very tricky, very tricky. I've seen this when doing this for clients. So take care of that, that you take your time to do the mapping, because it is very tricky sometimes. And for the software tools, improvements are necessary. Output files were not ESEF compliant, but you have to bear in mind this was 2017, and tool providers have been working on the accuracy of the tools meanwhile. Okay, just last but not least, some experience from implementation projects, built-in or bolt-on solutions. I mentioned this. Repercussions and processes are often underestimated. It's not just an accounting issue. You have to involve everybody who is involved in the annual reporting process. Take care of that. Don't underestimate it. This is my advice. I mentioned the tagging of the primaries, or doing already the block tagging in one go. When you devote your time now to understand ESEF taxonomy, rounding errors, this is one practice thing. Do not adjust figures for rounding in ESEF. The tools must cope for that. This is clearly regulated by ESMA. You cannot play around with the numbers to make them work. It's the tool providers, they have to work on that. Tags from notes can be used for the primaries. I think these are also mentioned. Extensions is an issue. Footnotes to be tagged. This is a nice one when tagging in practice. You have to see how this works in your tool and if you can do that. Or percentage changes. Do you tag this? If you have percentage changes in your statements, how do you work on this? And of course, when it comes to tool providers, be aware that it's not just the same approach. There's different approaches by each tool, and you should watch out for this. The approach that makes life the easiest for you when you have to do the whole ESEF implementation now, and also for the future, because this is something that is not a one-time exercise, but it's a continuing exercise, because it's a continuing communication with your readers of financial statements. That is what you always have to bear in mind when doing the ESEF reporting. And of course, we from BDO, we support you in every step of ESEF implementation projects, be it with project resources, project planning, tool selection, process redesign, streamline disclosures. We look over what you report, if this does make sense, if you could streamline it a bit actually. Implementation and parameterization, we help you on supporting when you upload the tool actually. We explain taxonomy and IFRS requirements. We also do the tagging or validate the correct tagging, and we help you if you need to do the reconciliation with the annual auditor to give him some guidance on what you did in your tagging actually and how the validation rules work. So that's it from my side, and now I'm happy, of course, to answer all of your questions. More than happy to do that. So please, let's go ahead with the questions.
So we have altogether 6 questions from the audience. The first question Peter is asking, how do auditors review the XBRL statements? What do they focus on? And referring to this question, I would just combine it with another one already asked Matthias. Can you also elaborate a bit on the timing of the audit in relation to the date of auditor's opinion, German Testatsdatum? Is it possible to have the audit done after this date?
No, I think you should not, because the auditor should give his, at least in Germany, that's clearly regulated. You should have, and the audit opinion needs to include some statement on ESEF actually. And you cannot do the audit and then you do the ESEF later on, because this is what I showed in the slides earlier. You should not do this at different points in time because everybody gets confused actually. So when you do your PDF process, if you still stick with that, then you do your PDF, but soon you have to do your ESEF reporting, and then the auditor must take a look at that actually, and needs to provide some comment on it if this is all appropriate. If the XHTML, this is the easier part because it's the human readable part. If this is compliant with your PDF version, if you start with this. By the way, when you do this, you have to make sure what is your process for communicating your annual numbers to the public actually, because you have to have a process. You have to be careful not to upload your data to the ORM and then they upload it before you have your press conference scheduled. So also take an eye on that and watch out for that. About the future of the publication process. So, and I think the auditor opinion should be ready when you have that, and you should have the ESEF ready when you do the publication of your numbers. You cannot say, okay, because all the investors will ask for, okay, where's your ESEF numbers? I like to play with it. And the one said that this XBRL Europe Day, I talked to some analysts, and they are more than happy to work with ESEF data, because then they can even, of course, easily read out your electronic data, and probably this is gonna replace the Excel numbers that are provided by many companies when they publish their annual statements. I think then the focus will also be on providing the ESEF data, especially the inline XBRL, to allow investors to play around with your data, to benchmark it industry-wide and things like this. So what do we review? We of course review if this is in line the XHTML. This is rather easy, of course, and the more difficult part is to see the ESEF tagging actually, and this is what the auditors need to focus actually. If extensions are done properly, if validations are done properly, so we will take a look at 4I's principles, of course, the usual audit topics actually, and then take a look at the validation rules, the reports within the tools that we have available. We might also think of redoing the tagging, having a separate audit tool that makes it really transparent how the tagging was done actually. If you used extensions when you should have used extensions, and there was really no tag available that could have been used alternatively if the numbers tie up. But of course, key are the validation rules, I would say. And currently, we also wait what the working group in Germany, they will come up with some further guidance. I'm forward looking to seeing what they will come up with. But I think this is quite the obvious to take a look at validations.
Yeah, thank you for your insightful answer. Before we move to the next question, I have an announcement to make. Those of you who are interested in the next sessions are free to leave us now. Those who are interested in getting the questions answered, please stay with us because we will continue with our Q&A session right now. So the next question is, do you think Austrian companies are well prepared for XBRL? Who should push the topic in a company, accounting department or investor relations?
Well prepared for XBRL. I'm not so sure, actually. I think a lot of companies are rather late, and even given the COVID crisis, I think they have been distracted from it. And I know I had some from clients that they have been rather early in their process to implement ESEF, but then they were focusing and all distracted by the COVID crisis, actually. Then they had to do the half-year statements, and now they end up with being rather late, actually, and now being rushing into it and find out, that it's not such an easy exercise, because even uploading of, let's say, the taxonomy and the tool and parameterization of the tool is not so easy. And then they find out, okay, there's other departments that are affected. Of course, it's investor relations and accountants that are dealing a lot with it. I think both of them are key, actually, but others will also be involved, because if you consider, for instance, the risk management report, this comes from a different department. Usually this is done by risk management, and if they contribute to the annual report, you have to also include them in the process and see what it means for them. Probably they have to do it in a different way, in a different platform, in a different format, with a different time frame. So you have to redesign the process. And this involves more than that. So I think what is important is that this ESEF has a governance which is really high in the hierarchy and is overarching and including all the mainly affected departments, actually, with a clear project governance structure and a clear project time frame and resources allocated. Otherwise, I'm afraid you run into trouble.
Okay, thank you for this answer. We have another question, which I think might have been answered during the presentation, but nevertheless, Birgit was asking, to whom and when has the tagged HTML report and the other HTML documents be sent? To the Wiener Zeitung, to the ÖKB, to the FMA?
No, not to the FMA, please. I'm not sure what to do with it. No, because it's quite clear. Each national country has its OM, its officially appointed mechanism for publication of legally required information. And of course, in Austria, it's ÖKB. They maintain the platform. I've been talking a lot to them, actually, and asking them for please provide some guidance, because of course companies need to know how they can upload it, and there needs to be a process. So they established now this test upload facility. Actually, what I, from my point, would wish is to have some more guidance on the process, actually, because if you want to have it rather simultaneously with the publication of results, there needs to be a process. Actually, but in Austria, clearly it's the ÖKB, in Germany it's the Bundesanzeiger. What is interesting, just by the way, is that the Bundesanzeiger also wants to validate the numbers. I'm surprised a little bit by this, because taking responsibility for the content and the appropriateness of the tagging, I think I'm not sure if the one who provides the uploading platform should do this. In Austria, the financial market authorities think they should enforce on the validation. But this is more understandable from my point of view than what we see in Germany with the Bundesanzeiger, because this could have, of course, legal implications if investors base investment decisions on the tagged data, actually, but that's what they are supposed to be used for. And then they could claim, okay, why didn't you claim that you did validate the number and you didn't, and there were erroneous decisions on my part because data was incorrect. I wouldn't have taken investment decisions. So I think it's all rather difficult if you do this. I think if the uploading platform takes the responsibility in Germany, but of course it's a decision of Bundesanzeiger. And of course, this is just my personal comments on it.
There's another question. I think you've already answered. What data package has to be uploaded, and what's the deadline? So again, deadline, but maybe you could say more once again about what data package has to be uploaded.
Yeah, the data package covers, of course, the annual financial report, actually. So, of course, it covers everything, which is, of course, subject to the ESEF reporting, the financial statements. It covers as well the individual accounts in XHTML format. And, of course, you have to follow the procedure or the guidelines by GmbH. This has to be done in XHTML or ZIP format. There might be some restrictions. There's also some ESMA guidance if you can include some links, some hyperlinks, if you include some other links in the data. This is still a bit unclear. I haven't read the detailed guidance of the ÖKB, what they allow, what they don't allow, that you can have hyperlinks in your uploaded data actually. But of course, it should be the annual reporting package that you need to upload.
Perfect. And last question in this session, does the audit report with signatures need to be included in the XHTML file with tags?
Yes.
Short
but
question,
of course,
short answer.
Given that there is no clear guidance in Austria, I mean, this is not so clear actually, but of course it should be because it's part of the financial statements, of course. But it should be, yes, from my point of view.
Yeah, that were all questions we received during the presentation so far. Maybe I could ask you for one last sentence to conclude the presentation.
Yeah, of course. If you're not finished with it, I would really ask our companies, I would really think it's now time because we're mid-September. So you should get it ready as soon as possible, actually, to be prepared for ESEF filing. And what you should bear in mind is that this is financial market communication. It's not just an additional burden, but you should see it more as a chance than just see it as an additional task imposed by EU, because this will change the way you report to the financial markets in the future, actually.
Thank you for the session. Thank you for being here with us at the DRC. Thank you for your time.
Okay, it was a pleasure.